Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Harmon, Director of Cross-Campus Engagement at the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship, and I'm really excited today to be talking with Elise Lockwood. Elise is the Qualitative Research Director for DORIS Research. So thank you for joining us, Elise. I thought we would start by first having you talk to us a little bit about what does DORIS Research do for clients, and in particular, what is your role at this company?
Yeah, so at DORIS Research, we conduct workplace research using a design thinking methodology. So what that means is we help our clients make the best possible physical workplace for the people who work there. And we do that by leading every single person from individual contributors to the C-suite through design thinking together. And at DORIS, what I do is, as qualitative research director, I'm in charge of making sure that all of the research we conduct is the best it can possibly be. But internally, I also do a lot with strategy and with developing new products, where we also use design thinking and design sprints to make sure that what we're offering is always innovative and on the cusp of what's coming next in the industry.
Great, awesome. I know that design thinking is one of the key innovation strategies that your firm uses. How would you define design thinking?
I would define design thinking as a process for solving complex problems. So it can be applied to any industry or any type of problem that you don't already know the solution for.
Very good. And what would you say would be some of like the goals or outcomes that you would expect to see using a design thinking process?
Yeah, so design thinking is incredibly people-centered or user-centered. So when I think about outcomes, I think of, the outcome could be a service, a physical product, a process, a community, but that outcome should always have involved the people who are affected by the problem. So I would expect the outcome to be innovative in that the people who are affected by the challenge you're solving have already been part of creating the solution. So whatever you're launching at the end, you should already have people who care about it and who know about it, and it should already have been tested and vetted. So with the design thinking process, you should have a much higher rate of success with whatever you're developing than maybe using other less user-centered processes.
Gotcha. I hear I hear people using design sprints, and then I hear design thinking. What is the difference, if there is a difference between those two concepts?
Yeah, so a design sprint is a specific application of design thinking. So if you have a time constraint, or if you have a team who's maybe newer to design thinking, a design sprint is an awesome way to do that process in a really defined and more rigid experience, whereas design thinking is much broader and uses many more tools and can be over a longer period of time. So there's a lot more flexibility within a wider design thinking process.
How do you then, as a design thinker or facilitator in this process, what is your role? And could you kind of maybe walk us through an example of what you would do with a company to help facilitate this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So at DORIS Research, we actually have a specific design thinking process that we have created for studying physical workplaces. But to give a very quick summary of what that might look like using design thinking terminology, the first thing that we would do is define what the challenge is that we want to solve. So for example, we might be working with a business college at a university, and they might have a space that they know they want to call the Innovation Commons, but they don't know what that space might look like. They have some goals for it. They know they want it to be a community space, but they don't want it to feel like the rest of campus. So great, that is a complex challenge that we could help solve. So the first thing that we do is we empathize with the users and gather a lot of data. This is where we want to know what they care about, and we also want to know what's already been done, because we don't want to repeat a failure, or if people have already been successful, that is a point where if we find success immediately, then the design thinking process might not be a great fit. But great, let's say that we empathize, we collect data, we look at what's already been done. then the next step is to actually define what we're going to do. So that's what's part of what's unique about design thinking, is you're not actually defining the challenge you're solving until the second sort of step. So we define more about the requirements and constraints of what we want that space to look like, what we want it to have, and what we know it should not have. And then we go back to our users and we ideate and prototype with them. So this is where I might be taking all of the data and synthesizing it into a really fun and active workshop where we're trying to come up with literally hundreds of ideas of what that space might look like, and then build rapid prototypes of them and test them right then and there, so that we already get feedback on prototypes created by users, given feedback by users of what we should invest more time in.
Very cool. Very cool. So it sounds like you mentioned you're going to be actually talking to the actual customer. So in the case study you presented, you would actually want to talk one-on-one with the students themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk about the people who are affected by a challenge, in this specific case study, we were talking to both students as well as business people in the community, because they were the ones who the space was intended for. And then we were also talking to leadership at the university, and they were acting as kind of like the guiders, the prioritizers of the project, but they were not necessarily the ones that we were collecting data or ideating and prototyping with.
Gotcha. So it sounds like that when a client hires you, they really need to trust you to identify the right solution. And I imagine that can be a little bit of a challenge, that they probably have a lot of ideas already, what they want to see, and sort of preconceived solutions already. What kind of challenges is that from your perspective in trying to work with this client relationship, and how do you sort of resolve that?
Yeah, absolutely. You are completely right in that design thinking relies on emergent solutions. So at the beginning of a process, you can never know exactly what the outcomes are. One of the ways that we deal with that is, you totally hit on it, by building trust with a client. We want to make sure that everyone feels heard at every step, and then also giving that leadership team control over what is important to them, what they already know and don't want to be investigated, versus the areas that they're unsure about and want to know more about. We also help mitigate this by giving a large amount of data. So when we're talking about the solutions or the prototypes at the end, we're not presenting a single solution. We're usually presenting 8 to 10, and they're always conceptual, because we're not interior designers or architects. So we try to say, like, you may not know what your budget is or whether you're going to renovate your office or move to a new location, but here are the things that your people care about and some different ways that they could be implemented.
Gotcha. Do you use any kind of like tools or platforms to help you track this data? Are there any sort of common infrastructure that would be really helpful to understand or know how to use in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are also a remote workforce. So we are across the country. So we have locations in Eugene, and then in Denver and Indianapolis, and we'll be expanding more. So tools that are digital or cloud-based, or that we can share, are really, really important to us. We use Airtable as a project management tool, as well as a database tool for our qualitative and quantitative data. And then honestly, Google Suite has been absolutely essential for our team, just because it's really easy to use. It's a great place to collaborate quickly without a huge learning curve. And then honestly, the tools that we use the most with actual users face to face are analog. We love putting like big posters up when we're asking people to rate their satisfaction with certain parts of their workplace. We physically use cups that are labeled from very unsatisfied to very satisfied, and then popsicle sticks so that they can sort and see in real time how they feel about their workplace. So it's a good balance of, digital cloud-based apps and software, and then good old-fashioned props.
Very interesting. Cool. I imagine during the actual design thinking process that there might be some challenges or things that you particularly try to mitigate early on. In your long history of doing this, what sort of challenges or things should someone be aware of so that they don't, uh, you know, make the outcomes negative in any way, form? So is anything in that realm?
Yeah, so I would say there are two main things to focus on that I also like try to keep in the back of my mind every time I'm doing a design thinking process. The first is something we've touched on a little bit, and it's assumptions. It's you might go into a design thinking process as a facilitator or a leader with an idea in your brain of what the solution might already be, or even assumptions about what you think this group of users or stakeholders would want. Those can honestly poison a design thinking process. So what I like to do is I like to write them down immediately, just somewhere, get them out of my brain so that I've got them on paper. I feel like they're out there, and then I can move on and commit to the process and open myself up to maybe those more surprising or unexpected insights that are really important. And then the other part of design thinking that can be a little more challenging is making sure that you are involving your users and stakeholders as much as possible. I would say that where I've seen design thinking not be as successful is when you're not going back to your users in that ideating or prototyping stage enough, and you are instead internally deciding what is important, what the best ideas are, and what's working. And that space between you and your users is where you can kind of get away from what they actually want or are interested in. And then there's also a third one, which is design thinking. It's really easy to be divorced from the real world and be in this wonderful bubble of innovation and great ideas. But at some point, you have to figure out the right place in the process where budget and time and those actual real world constraints become important again.
Very good, very good. That makes a lot of sense. At, you know, as you're looking at corporate America, are you seeing like any trends in terms of larger corporations leaning more or less in design thinking? Are they trying to build their own design thinking teams within house or hire, firms like DORIS Research? What kind of trends do you see right now going on in corporate America around design thinking?
So I think one of the first trends that I see is I think design thinking is being used more and more in the technology industry, especially when it comes to new product development or as a tool for user research. One of the reasons that design thinking can be great is it works best with an interdisciplinary or cross-functional team. So it can be a really great like common language collaboration tool where if you have people who are engineers or project managers or product owners or people from the business strategy side, design thinking can be, a common language process that everyone's familiar with. And then honestly, the biggest trend I've seen in corporate America across all the different industries we work with is a stress on collaboration and collaboration tools. And I think a lot of the times design thinking, even if you're not going through the entire process, you can steal bits and pieces from it that make your team better at collaborating. And one of the things I love about We Do that's a side effect of just bringing an entire organization through the process is people can steal the methods that they like and take them back to their team and use them. So whether you're going through the whole process or just stealing bits and pieces, I think it's great for collaborating.
That's great. If a student was interested to learn more or get into a career like yourself, what kind of advice, are there any kind of like degrees or certifications that can help their competency around design thinking?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about design thinking is that if you just search for design thinking programs, you'll see that they are housed in an incredibly wide variety of colleges. There are ones where it's focused on product design or product work, on business strategy, on social sciences in that area. So I think the first thing I would advise a student is to figure out how you want to apply it. So are you using it for entrepreneurship and business, or do you want to use it for product development? And then there are certificates as well as master's degrees. I would say that if you're really interested in the research side of it, that's where I got a master's degree. But if you just want to use it as a tool within your team or a startup, I would say that there are so many resources out there for free that you could get your hands on. I would highly recommend looking at Stanford D School's Bootcamp Bootleg, which is a free PDF and leads you through a design thinking process and gives you tons of tools that you can try out. And then IDEO is probably one of the most well-known design thinking firms, and they have a ton of resources for people getting started as well. But at the end of the day, because it's a process, in order to get good at it, you have to do it, which can be scary and a little bit painful, but you have to be a practitioner.
Thank you so much, Elise. I really appreciate it. Elise Lockwood, Qualitative Research Director at DORIS Research. Thanks so much, Elise. Have a good day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.